Americans now believe that you need $1.8 million to comfortably retire, according to a Charles Schwab study this year, and the average number of years they expect their savings to last is 23 years. And the problem I find with a lot of these surveys is oftentimes they drive the narratives in our society. Once this study was published, then a bunch of news outlets picked it up, and this was a headline all over the internet. So is it logical though? Because the people citing this number are just survey participants, and perhaps $1.8 million just sounds like a nice number. I'm not actually too sure how they landed on that number. The point is that the amount that you actually need to retire can be a lot less. So in today's video, we'll discuss why that is and the math around how much you need to retire comfortably, and I'll show you that it doesn't have to be anywhere close to $1.8 million. When it comes to your ability to retire and what your nest egg should be, it's entirely dependent on how much you're spending in retirement. If you ask Fidelity how much that is, they'll actually say that you should plan to spend about 80% of whatever you're making annually in retirement. That means if you make $100,000 in salary per year, very good, you should plan to spend about $80K per year in retirement. If you're even more conservative though, and perhaps you make even a higher salary, Fidelity says that you should plan to spend around 55 or maybe even 60% of what you were making in retirement. But the crazy thing to me is that according to the data as of 2 years ago, the median retirement account balance in the US for somebody aged 65 to 74 was around $200,000. For those that were 75 and older, it was actually $130,000. Both of these figures are very far away from the $1.8 million needed. Now, in addition, 82% of adults over the age of 60 reported doing at least okay financially, so clearly that shows us that there's some sort of difference between what Fidelity recommends, what the articles are saying, and how the average American is actually doing. When it comes to how much you need to retire, it's very dependent on how much you plan on spending, as well as any other income sources you might have. You might have a side hustle, a pension, or perhaps Social Security. And your spending is just one part of the equation when it comes to figuring out what your total retirement savings needed are. You also need to know your withdrawal rate, aka how much of your nest egg you will be withdrawing every single year. And that brings me to the most popular rule in retirement planning, which is the 4% rule, but there's actually a twist with this rule in today's video, which I will get into. The 4% rule is known as the standard in retirement planning. It just basically states that you can withdraw 4% of your nest egg in the first year of retirement, then adjusting that amount for inflation every year thereafter. The typical time frame of retirement is actually 30 years, according to the founder of this rule, William Bengen. But recently though, this rule has come under a bit of fire, most notably because the founder of the 4% rule himself has, quote, suggested raising the target rate to 4.5 or even 5% when he saw that many retirees were dying before spending down their life savings. And that's probably a situation you don't want as a retiree, like you die with more money that you could have spent during your life. In the most optimal world, you are probably spending just enough so that whenever you do perhaps expire, your retirement savings balance is exactly zero. Now, that's if you want to be hyper optimal. Of course, there's going to be those people that save a bunch of money and never spend it so that they can pass it on to their kids, their families, their trust fund, whatever, etc. So Bengen started to notice that retirees were dying before spending down their savings, and when he examined it closer, he said that, quote, that he created his 4% rule based on an imaginary investor who retired in October of 1968. That person ran into a terrible perfect storm of bad stock market returns and very bad inflation. So that was in 1968, but then I found this article that was published in late 2022 that says he has now expanded his withdrawal rate rule to be a little bit less conservative, and that was due to a few factors. In an interview with Money with Katie, which is a morning brew show here on YouTube, William Bengen actually stated that his original thesis included a very simple portfolio.
The original research just had two asset classes, intermediate term U.S. Treasury bonds and U.S. large cap stocks. Not exactly a diversified portfolio, but, had to start from somewhere.
So we can see that his original research included a simple portfolio of just two asset classes, and while some people would probably use this type of portfolio, most investors these days have a larger mix of asset classes than just, let's say, intermediate bonds and large cap stocks. And as he's added more asset classes to his own portfolio, he was able to backtest against his new portfolio composition and basically revise his suggestion to ultimately increase his suggested withdrawal rate. According to the same article, William, quote, has increased the withdrawal rate he uses on his own retirement portfolio to 4.7%, largely because of the upside he's gained by adding small and microcap asset classes to his portfolio. He has also said that, quote, right now I use 7 asset classes, including 5 in stocks, cash, and treasury bonds, and I think it tracks closer to what a sophisticated investor would use. So, quick message from today's sponsor. So, one of the issues that I regularly face is accurately keeping track of my subscriptions. Even though I track 99% of my expenses, I genuinely still will forget some of the subscriptions that I sign up for through mobile apps. That's where the sponsor of today's video, Rocket Money, can really help. Now, by signing up for Rocket Money, you can cancel any memberships right through their app. They ask for a bit of personal information just so that they can cancel it on your behalf, and they usually take just a few days, but they can cancel any unwanted subscriptions with just a tap. Now, I'm pretty good with my finances, but I personally use it these days just to keep tabs on all of my subscriptions to make sure that I never run into a situation where I'm paying for something that I'm not using. You can also use Rocket Money to automatically monitor your spending by category and get notifications when you've exceeded your limits. So since I eat out a lot, for example, I could do this with restaurants and get notified and alerted whenever I'm going too hard on sushi. Rocket Money has helped save its customers up to $740 per year with over $500 million in canceled subscriptions. So just go to rocketmoney.com/Humphrey or click the link in description to get started for free. You can also unlock even more features with premium, and that's rocketmoney.com/Humphrey to get started for free. And thank you to them for sponsoring this portion of the video. All right, let's say we are going to go with his recommendation. How does a 4.7% withdrawal rate actually change what your retirement savings amount looks like? Well, it turns out quite a lot, because if you want to spend $40,000 per year in retirement and you plan on withdrawing 4% of your nest egg every year, you actually need a total nest egg of $1 million. Now, if you were just to happen to change that withdrawal rate to 4.7%, you would only need $851,063 in order to retire comfortably. That's a difference of over $149K just from changing how much you're withdrawing every single year. Now, of course, the biggest risk to consider here when you're withdrawing that much more money every year is that you are increasing the risk that you outlive your money. However, William Bengen, the founder of the 4% rule, suggests that based on his historical back data, and if you have a well-diversified portfolio, that the 4.7% rule is well within reason and actually quite conservative, and you can actually go with this. Of course, I would probably argue that if you are on the risk-averse side, that you can still stick with the 4% rule or even lower, especially if you're retiring earlier, but I did want to show you the relationship between a higher withdrawal rate and how it affects the total retirement savings that you actually need. Now, taking this a step further, if you actually targeted a $1.8 million retirement fund like the articles and studies state, then withdrawing 4.7% of it every single year would allow you to withdraw $84,600 annually. At 4%, that annual withdrawal rate is actually the equivalent of $72,000. I'm going to argue that most retirees in America probably won't spend between $72,000 to $84,000 per year in retirement. That's considering the fact that the median personal income in the United States for an individual is around $50,000 per year, and that the average person will probably spend less than their salary in retirement anyway. There are some other considerations to consider as well, like the fact that if we include the pension or the Social Security payments, or perhaps any side hustles or side income in our equation here. According to the Social Security Administration, the average retirement benefit, so how much somebody gets paid every single month, at least in January of 2024, was $1,907. Let's actually round that down to $1,800 per month in Social Security, just to be somewhat conservative here, and that's still $21,600 per year that's provided to you by the government, and will therefore reduce the total amount that you actually need as your nest egg. So back to our original example there, if you want to spend $40,000 per year in retirement, but you're actually getting Social Security or a pension to the tune of $21,600 per year, that means you need to spend roughly $19,400 of your nest egg on the first year. So at a 4.7% withdrawal rate, you would need your retirement savings to be around $412,000. Of course, a lot of you guys in the comments will probably come at me and state, well, we don't really know if Social Security is still going to be around by the time we retire. And oh, Social Security benefits decrease the older that you get. Yes, I am aware both of those are true, but I am merely showing you that if you have some extra income, how it can affect the total amount that you actually need to retire. My main goal here is to actually debunk the article and the Schwab study that says that you need $1.8 million to retire comfortably, because for a lot of you guys, you can do it for a lot less. Now, another big goal for a lot of you guys out there is going to be early retirement. Now, in that case, the earlier you want to retire, the more money that you will need, since you need to live off of that amount for even longer. So what I like to do for fun, and also what you can do, is to use a website like Networthify's calculator to figure that out. If we simply play around with it, you can see that someone with the current annual income of $75,000 and a 70% savings rate can retire in 7.1 years, starting with a zero portfolio balance. As soon as you turn that savings rate down to 50%, we're looking at at 12.1 years, and then at a 20% savings rate, it'll take you much longer to get there, 26.7 years. As your savings rate increases by 5% incrementally, the number of working years you need until retirement will actually go down. Now, you can see with this table here, this actually assumes the 4% withdrawal rate rule, but you can see that at a savings rate of 10%, it will take you around 51 years until retirement. It really starts to get good and shorter at a 65% savings rate where you can retire within a decade. But if we take a look at the average American savings rate in the US, it's actually 4.5%. So that actually shows us that retiring in America is extremely difficult unless we increase our savings rates. That's why on the channel, I always recommend that if you can strive for a savings rate of at least 15% or maybe even 20% or higher, then your chances of early retirement are going to be possible. All right, here's another example. Let's pretend you have an annual salary of $100,000 and you save 40% of it per year, and your portfolio value as of right now is $50,000. Technically, you could retire in 15.2 years with a 4.7% withdrawal rate. That means if you're the age of 30 right now, if you're able to save a ton of money and invest it, you theoretically could retire by the age of 45. I'll leave a link to this calculator down below, but I think it's fun to play around with and really understand your numbers. Again, remember, if you are saving a ton of money, let's say you save 25%, 30%, or maybe even 40%, that the most important part of that whole equation there is that you stay disciplined and maintain that savings rate as long as possible in order to retire early. All right, so now that we know that we might not need a really big nest egg to retire at the more traditional age of 67, we still want to come up with an action plan to get us to retirement. So I have 4 huge tips for you guys as part of a mini guide on how to figure that out. The first thing you must do is to define your retirement preferences and be flexible with how much they may change. So I would ask myself a question like, do you want to spend 20K per year or 40K per year or 60K per year? Or do you want a lifestyle where you can spend anything and not just have to worry? Once you figure that out, you want to reevaluate where you are every single year along the way, especially if you're trying to retire early. Things are always going to change, and we must be dynamic when it comes to what our retirement looks like, especially as our income might fluctuate or our expenses might fluctuate. Number 2, the second thing you must do is to avoid life decisions that actually derail your compounding, such as lifestyle creep. Avoid things like getting a crazy fancy new car or getting involved in some sort of get-rich-quick scheme that will kill your ability to retire early. Number 3, plan as much as you can, so both with investments as well as relationships and family decisions. For example, if you're retiring early, you should also consider that your retirement accounts can't be withdrawn until the age of 59 and a half without penalty. So if you're retiring at the age of 40 or 45, you actually need to consider where's your money going to come from before your retirement funds actually unlock. Another thing to consider is that your partner will play a huge role in if you can actually retire early because of their income. Perhaps that will be added to your income, or perhaps their spending habits are a little bit out of whack. I don't know. And also, if you have children, that's another thing to consider. That will probably slow down your retirement speed because of how expensive children are, but hopefully it's a fulfilling thing to have. Lastly, I want you guys to try to keep your investment fees as low as possible. Don't try to time the market, and don't take on any hard money or bad debt like credit card debt. All right, guys, I hope that this video